Kia ora, New Zealand. I've just seen here that the government, I'm just reading from my screen, is giving 122 million to meet the increased demand for ORS, ongoing resource scheme, for students with high and complex needs. This includes a structural change to the funding model. So every child who's verified for ORS funding receives the support they need. Says here the investment will also increase the number of specialists and teacher aid time to support more than 1,700 additional learners forecast to access ORS over the next 4 years. Okay. And then it says 192 million to ensure that over 3 years, all year 1 to 8 schools in Kura are funded for a learning support coordinator to work with students, families, and educators to identify and respond to learner needs. This investment will benefit 1,250 schools and an additional 300,000 learners around New Zealand. 3 million of investment in our teacher aids with targeted professional development for working with learners with social, emotional, wellbeing, behavioural and neurodiverse needs. So teacher aids, not teachers, teacher aids. So they're putting 4 million in to employ 25 intern educational psychologists to enable a sustainable pipeline of locally trained workforce. And the interesting part here, 90 million of capital for approximately 25 new learning support satellite classrooms to provide around 225 new student places across the Ministry of Education specialist school network, as well as provide learning support property modifications so that the schools are more accessible to learners with additional needs. Now, the interesting thing is here that anybody who's a parent of a child with disabilities or complex needs knows that to get into the ORS funding, to actually get your child ORS funding, is virtually impossible, even if they have high and complex needs. This is the reality, New Zealand, and this is the reality I want New Zealand to understand. 1% of students in New Zealand who have high and complex needs get ORS funding. So the rest don't really get much of anything. And they're sort of in a limbo land. And while I go, oh, wow, look at all this funding, it says for ORS funding to meet the demand for ORS. And I know there are kids out there with very severe learning needs who are never going to be able to really participate in, what do we call it, mainstream school. But the schools have done away, or the government, not the schools, the schools would like to have streaming and that sort of thing and learning support units and stuff like that. They love to have all this kind of thing. And I'm sure many teachers want way more students to be able to get ORS funded. They definitely do because it's needed. But the government or the Ministry of Education has done away with streaming. So they want to put everybody together in one lump and have a one-size-fits-all model for teaching and learning. And so as students who actually have high and complex needs and cannot get ORS funding, are sort of left in this middle, and they're expected to cope. So basically, it's a model. The current model of learning and doing and teaching in New Zealand is that students with high and complex needs, such as autism, neurodiversity, and intellectual handicaps, are expected to just fit in. And so they say these children have behavioural needs. They have emotional and behavioural needs. Oh, and we've got to put all these experts in to talk to the parents and the teachers and the students about their behavioural and emotional needs. No, they have behavioural and emotional needs. Do you know why? Because you've mainstreamed everything. You've put everything. The stupid government, and I'll say it again, you're a stupid government that said that everybody doesn't matter about diversity. No one's really diverse. Everyone has to be the same. Everyone has to function within this schooling system that we've created where it's a one-size-fits-all model. all the students have to go to class, all the students learn the same, because they have to sit there and they have to learn the same. And somehow this teacher's teaching Shakespeare, and there's a kid who's functioning at curriculum level one. So basically, they're functioning like a 5 or 6 year old, and they have to sit there in class while this teacher's teaching Shakespeare or teaching some novel. Um, that you need above 12-year-old reading age to understand, even teaching essay writing, teaching all this stuff for NCA, level 1 and 2 and 3, and this kid still functioning at curriculum level 1 who cannot get ORS funding is expected to sit there and do the work, often not even with a teacher aide to help, because that requires funding to actually have a teacher aide full time. It requires ORS funding to have a teacher aide, working with that student one on one, to be able to cope in a mainstream classroom, to be able to cope, let alone do any of the work. And I can tell you, New Zealand, that these secondary teachers, their main focus is on average to above average students. It's not on the students who are struggling. It never will be, and it never has been. Because in the past we had learning support units, and kids who had high and complex needs really struggled working at curriculum level 1. um, uh, you know they were in the learning support unit. They were getting appropriate teaching, they were getting appropriate support. The building was designed in a way, the layout of the building, everything, the whole focus within the learning support unit was on these students with high and complex needs. Now, the government just throwing money about like this and getting on all these experts to say, yeah, your kid has high and complex, your kid with high and complex needs has emotional problems and behavioral problems. Oh dear, let's pay, some expert to come and tell the school, yes, that kid has emotional, and what are you doing about it? Just word salad soup, just a lot of nonsense. They're paying a lot of people, basically, was what I'm trying to say, to um, shift money about, and to have 1,000 million meetings to get a tiny bit of funding for that student that lasts, I don't know, a term. It's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. And I want to hear from parents out there. I want to hear from other parents out there who are going through this, who can echo my sentiments as well, throughout this country. And because even though, oh, wow, there's all this funding that's been given by the government, it's given in the wrong way. If you mainstream the school, sorry, I call it mainstreaming because it is streaming. It still is streaming. It's saying everything should be centered in the middle. Everything should work for the above and average students. There's a one size fits all model. Everyone has to go to class. Everyone has to fit in. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter your diverse needs. You all have to fit in because there's no exclusivity anymore. It's everyone must be functioning the same. You've got high and complex needs. You've got behavioural and emotional problems. Oh, let's get an expert to say, look, this student's got behavioural and emotional problems. What can we do about it? Well, you know what would be more cost effective and what would be more practical and pragmatic is if you hadn't stopped streaming. If you had realised that diversity means that there's not a one size fits all model, that diversity means that you have to create a system sometimes of exclusivity, that these people have exclusive needs. They have such high and complex needs that they're not going to function ever well in a mainstream setting. I mean, in the average overall school, they need a different learning support unit, and that you need to make the criteria for ORS funding far wider and less restrictive than it currently is, far wider. So in the past, if a student only functioned or only could do work at curriculum level 1, they got ORS funding, right? Nowadays, no. Oh, he can write his name and hang his bag on a hook. He can speak in a sentence. Therefore, he doesn't get ORS funding. But that kid still has high and complex needs. That kid still has really challenging behaviors. He has medical needs, possibly. Um, He has complete meltdowns in the mainstream setting. I mean, just the normal school environment. But that kid has none of those issues, none of those problems, and can actually learn quite well and achieve quite a lot if he was in a learning support unit full time with the caring, kind learning support teachers who are actually skilled and adept at teaching students with high and complex needs, syndromes, learning disabilities, intellectual handicaps. I'll call it an intellectual handicap because that's what it is. They are handicapped. They have huge challenges. They have huge issues going forward in life that students who are mainstream, your average and above average students who don't have complex learning needs or learning disabilities will never have. Those kids are going to cruise by compared to kids with high and complex needs and learning disabilities, intellectual handicaps, autism, ADHD, all that kind of stuff. That is really challenging, and that puts a huge hurdle in that child's way towards accessing learning, to be able to learn, to be able to thrive in a school environment. So what I would have liked to have seen is actually a return to sanity. And I would love to have seen politicians actually understanding what it is to be a parent of a child with diagnosed disabilities and to be a student with high and complex needs. I'd love the politicians to have really got gone out there and really understood the challenges faced by families with children with complex needs and disabilities and learning, high learning challenges, I would say, and also what it's like to be a family of those students. Um, so, what I would say is go back to streaming, go back to differentiated learning all over New Zealand and differentiated learning, the best way you could use your money, it would be far more cost effective, is just to have the learning support units. Just have the learning support units and increase the number of students that can go there and have a separate building, have a separate environment where the children can thrive, not just try and survive, but thrive and actually learn and have that one on one, have that exclusivity, exclusive environment. That is not discrimination. That is enabling 100% that student to thrive, to enjoy going to school, to not get bullied, to not have the huge levels of anxiety these students face, to actually have an environment where the other students are peers for them and they can understand each other and support each other and they're learning at a similar level and they're not being singled out like they do in a mainstream classroom, where it's okay to have a teacher aide working with you and a teacher who is adept and understanding of all the needs of these students. You don't take a whole lot of money and then spread it out thinly across all these schools. It doesn't make sense because all the money, I know it goes through the cracks, it seeps through the cracks, and there'll never be enough if you get a whole lot of money and spread it thinly out across everywhere and don't meet the needs of the students. Because at the end of the day, it's the experts that get all the money because they cost so much, right? The experts to tell you and just to, I don't know, hear a few things and have 1,000 different meetings. And where that money would be better spent just going directly to that student, wouldn't it? And so, doesn't it make sense, New Zealand, that you would have learning support units or, you know, um, schools or a school hub, a learning support unit, whatever you want to call it? You see them now, the special needs schools basically, but on campus, or sometimes they're separate from the school, but often they're on campus, the special needs unit. Um, let's just go back to using the language that's appropriate. It is a special needs unit, and just having special needs unit and not seeing it as discrimination. It's not discrimination. What I see as discrimination is the fact that you've closed down the special needs units, you've closed down streaming, and you've made everything mainstream, a one size fits all model, everyone's shoved in all together. And you're like, oh no, there's all these students with behavioral problems. There's all these students with emotional problems. Yeah, because you haven't looked at diversity for what it is. It's accepting the fact that there are people with all these diverse needs and they don't all fit together. They can't all fit together. The system isn't a one size fits all, can't be a one size fits all model when you do have a diversity of learners like this and a diversity of needs. And when you make ORS funding so restrictive, the criteria for getting it so restrictive that only 1% of students get it, you are doing a huge disservice. And I'd say it as a human rights crisis. It's completely undermining and discriminating against so many students out there because you're like, only this small percentage of kids get this funding, and the rest of you, too bad. Too bad, man. You just have to be normal. We want you to be normal like everyone else and just get along and function. Just get along and be like everyone else. Sit there while the teacher's teaching Shakespeare. Sit there while the teacher's teaching stuff that's completely going to go over your head. You're never going to be able to do the work, no matter what, even if they crunch it down and go, write one single line. Shakespeare lived in London. There you go. NCA level 1. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. These kids have so many different needs. They have so many more challenges, and they need to. We need to go back to a model where we celebrate special needs schools, where we actually say special needs schools or special learning support hubs, whatever you want to call it, they need to be exclusive because these kids are special. They need to be honoured. They need to be served better. They are the most vulnerable people in our society, and we need to put them on a pedestal and go, they deserve their own specialist, schools or learning hubs where they get the appropriate attention, the appropriate support, the appropriate care, and the appropriate teaching that's targeted solely for their needs, and in an environment that's physically created, like this learning space, or these hubs are physically created to meet the needs of the students and the challenges they face. And those kids are going to thrive, and they do. The kids that actually get ORS funding, and in the past, so many more children got ORS funding because the criteria wasn't as restrictive. So if you're at curriculum level 1, you got ORS funding. That's it. But now it's like going through the eye of a needle, to get that funding. And it still is. The criteria has not changed. So New Zealand, just wise up. The fact is, they say there's all this funding for ORS students and they're going to meet their needs and that. But there's so many more students that deserve ORS funding and really need it, and they're not going to get it, and they're going to slip through the cracks, and all that money's just going to be spread out across New Zealand, and these kids are still going to fall through the cracks, and their needs aren't going to be met, and they're not, they have so much anxiety and challenges they don't want to go to school because of it, and they're denied an education. So just wise up, New Zealand. I advocate for appropriate education for kids with high and complex needs in this country, and the appropriate supports. And the only way you're ever really going to get that is by ditching inclusion, because it's a horrific model, and realizing that diversity means that we need to meet the diverse needs of students, and that the only just say it straightforward, like just be straightforward about it. You need learning support units. You need special needs schools in place, and far more students need to be able to access those schools. So we need to open up the ORS criteria this much, from the eye of the needle to this much. And you just need to say, inclusion hasn't worked, it won't work, it will never fully work, and it's undermining the human rights of the disabled learner in this country.